Okay. Well, I think that's probably good. We should probably go ahead and get started on the final week of the free group lessons that we were doing. I can't believe we're here. Seemed like we just started, and it's already week 4. So yeah, I just want to remind everyone. I'll put it in the email when I send this link and the documents that Jeff has for today. When I send those out, but Jeff is our private lesson guitar teacher at the store, and if that's something anyone's interested in after we're done with this, if you want to continue and take just a private Zoom lesson, they're 30 minutes a week. I'll put that information in the email, and we can definitely get that set up if that's something somebody wants to do. So that's all I wanted to say. You can go ahead, Jeff. I'm gonna pin you.
Good morning. Welcome to the, as Nick said, the final group lesson that we have here. And as with every other week, we've started off and make sure everybody's in tune. So today we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure we're in tune, and we're just going to review that tuning method that we talked about a few weeks ago with the 5th fret. But the first thing we're going to do is get the 6th string in tune. There's any number of songs that you can tune your 6th string to if you don't have a tuner. Maybe you don't have I have a keyboard back here that I can use, or another guitar, or a tuner or something. Tuner batteries go dead, so it's always kind of helpful if you have some other reference point. You can probably go on YouTube and find a video where they actually have somebody playing the notes on the guitar. What you would do is you would use your ear and you kind of try to get it somewhat close to me, and then if you have a tuner, then you can, at least at that point it's close, and so it shouldn't have to tune it very far. Most of the time, as I point out to people, the most your guitar will go out of tune is about a quarter turn in either direction. Once we got that string kind of close, we can keep going with our tuner the rest of the way. But like I said, it's also good to have a backup plan, because sooner or later the tuners do run out of batteries, and battery goes dead or something, and you still need to be able to tune. You can, as pointed out, we can get one for the phone, but it's also good to be able to do it with the guitar itself. And so the next thing I'm going to do is come up to the 5th fret here on the 5th string. I'm going to play that note. That should be the same pitch as the 5th string, or I should say the 5th string should be the same pitch as the 6th string 5th fret, because we just tuned this string. We know this one's in tune, so we're really kind of checking the open string, and they should be the same. And then I move to the 5th fret on the 5th string. That should be the same as the 4th string open. Again, we're tuning the actual 4th string, so if I hear something that's not quite right, I'm going to reach up here and turn the tuning gear. So that's your 4th string. Next we go to the 4th string at the 5th fret, and that'll be the same as the 3rd string open. The next one is the one that's different. This is the one everybody always has a rough time remembering, and it's really, really important to get this one right, or else you end up with a guitar that's kind of really out of tune. Would be the 4th fret on the 3rd string. And that sounds a little bit off, so I'm going to check that out. So see, it's always a good idea to check your tuning. Then finally, on the 2nd string, back to the 5th fret, and that'll be the same as the 1st string open. Now, it's always obviously very, very important to keep your guitar in tune all the time. So as you go through it, like I just tuned it like right before we started, and I could always say, but I just tuned it, and I did. But I already discovered some things that are slightly out of tune. So it's always a good idea, whenever you can, check your tuning of your guitar and make sure it's in tune. That way it sounds the best it can sound. As we pointed out before, Then the way to check your tuning is to play some of those chords. We can use any of the chords we used last week. We can play a G chord, or a C chord, or an E minor chord, or a D7. If you know any other chords, you could play D, play, A. You maybe know some bar chords. You could play them up here. It's good to play chords all over the place as much as you can, and you can check your tuning. If it sounds good pretty much everywhere, you did a pretty good job of tuning it. One thing that we don't want to do, somebody says, is your guitar in tune? And they'll say, I don't know. And they'll do that. Well, that's not really supposed to sound like anything, so that's why we pointed out it's always a good idea to check with some chords. So anyway, this method is pretty common. Probably one of the most basic ways that people tune their guitar, and still probably one of the best ways to tune the guitar. There's other ways that people use this double checks. And then there's other things that people will do, things like this. They'll tune harmonics with regular notes, but that's more advanced stuff, and I think still one of the best ways to tune is probably like that, for the time being anyway. Last week we learned 4 chords. We learned G, C, D, 7, and an E minor chord. And today we're going to have a sheet, and Nick's going to be sending these to you later on. But I want to show you something first. I'm going to share my screen in terms of just different things you might see. These are just examples now. They're not specifically any particular type of song or anything like that. They're just kind of examples. At the very top here, the first exercise is a G chord and a C chord, and there's 2 chords that we did last week, but not in the same order that we did them last week. We did G, E minor, C, and then D7. And here we've got G and C. So whatever song you might be playing, it may not always use the chords in the same order that you learned them or whatever. And a lot of people, when it comes to playing a G chord and then a C chord, have a little bit of trouble, and it is kind of a hard chord change to make, because if you watch my hand when I play the G chord, I always have to spin my hand around to play the C. And so a couple things to watch for is, I always look at this side of my hand, number one, and see how close the pinky side of my hand is to the guitar neck. If I keep it really far away like this, I'm going to have a really rough time playing some chords, like C, for example. That's really pretty difficult to do right there, because this finger is almost straight, which is going to cause a lot of problems. So one thing I can try to do is I keep the pinky side of my hand a little bit closer to the guitar neck. It's just a way of kind of keeping my fingers a little more curled the whole time. Also, my thumb is approximately in the same axis as my second finger. You can see it's sort of right underneath my second finger on the C chord. Your thumb, like everything else on your hand, as you move from chord to chord, your thumb's going to change a little bit there, because it's there to provide support. And I can show you where my thumb is on each and every chord, but everybody's hands are a little different, so you have to sort of find what works best for you. One trick that I've shown people is, look at where my elbow is when I play, and I can take my elbow and I can throw it out like this the whole way. And obviously I can't do anything like that because it's really awkward. I can't play. It just doesn't sound like anything. And I can actually go to the opposite extreme and bring my elbow in the whole way like this, so it's almost behind the guitar, and I can play that, and I can try that way, and that's probably not going to work too well either. So those are 2 extremes. That's over here and then in the whole way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my elbow and I'll put it about halfway in between there, and I can rock it back and forth. I can bring it in a little bit, I can stick it out a little bit, and look what it's doing to my fingers. It's completely changing my fingers in terms of how they're, and I'm not moving my elbow that far. Now obviously, playing guitar, it's not really where my elbow is that's making the difference. It's the wrist position and my hand position that's changing. That's what's making the difference. But I'm controlling it by focusing on where I'm putting my elbow, and that's really controlling the angle in which my wrist is hitting. So that's something you can sort of experiment with. Everybody probably finds a place where it just sort of works better for them, and to me, I can focus on my elbow and notice what it's doing to my fingers, and just moving it in just a little bit further or moving it out just a little bit makes a big difference in what that chord sounds like. If I play the C chord like right now, I can tell that some of the notes are going to end up muted. Sound very good, but if I move it in just a little bit, I can clear it up real fast. So that's just moving a little bit. So all those little movements that you make with your hands really, really affect the way things sound. So when we go from the G to the C, you might find that I'm moving, if you watch me do it, I'm probably moving my elbow, which is in effect changing my hand position as I go from G to C, because when I'm playing the G chord like this, and I have my wrist in one position, and then I go to a C, I have to change things a little bit. Now, one thing that happened in this exercise is we'll notice that you've got a G chord, and there's 4 slash marks underneath that G chord, so you're going to play the G chord for 4. We emphasized last week that we're going to pretend that each slash mark represents one strum of that chord. In the second measure here, this is musical measures, there is no chord written, and so we're going to continue playing the G chord. As a matter of fact, there's some music where you might play G for 4 measures, or you might play for 8 measures, you may play something for 20 measures in a row until the music tells you to change to something else. There are actually a few songs, I believe, that are 1 chord the whole way through. I think Tomorrow Never Knows by the Beatles, I think, is 1 chord, but that's all kind of electronic, weird, stuff. And so, but anyway, it's like 1 chord the whole way through. And if you saw the chord sheet for it, it would just have 1 chord and have a whole bunch of slash marks representing beats. So what we're dealing with here is we're going to be playing the G for 8 counts, and then the C for 8 counts, and then we got the repeat sign at the end. And so some songs, like I said, we're not going to change every 4 beats. In this song, we're changing every 8 beats, or 2 measures. So we're still going to count to 4, but we're going to do it twice in a row. And we can tell that by the time signature over here at the beginning of the piece of music. There's 2 4s there. The top one right now is the most important one, because it tells us how we're counting. It's not that the bottom one's not important, but right now the top one is the most important one. It's telling us how we're counting. I always encourage everybody to use a metronome. I use one on my phone because it never dies unless I forget to charge it. But this is 60 beats a minute. There's nothing magical about that other than it's just 1 every second. So we're just going to play the first exercise just to sort of get warmed up and used to what it's like to change chords in an order that we didn't really work on before. The reason why this one's a little bit easier is because we do have 8 counts, so we got mentally a lot more time to prepare for the next chord in terms of rehearsing the finger movements. So 1, 2, 3, 4. G, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we go to C. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then back to G. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. C. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. G. And so on and so forth. And obviously, to practice this, you can play it over and over and over again. I think repetition, obviously, anybody who's ever played music on any instrument before knows that repetition is kind of the key to success in terms of, becoming proficient at something, whether it's playing chords or playing a scale or playing notes or playing a song or whatever. You want to obtain proficiency, you have to practice things over and over again. Next we have G and D. Now G and D also requires a little bit of change in hand position. Generally speaking, when I have a G chord, I have my thumb, oh, I don't know, about right there. So like sort of right underneath, actually right underneath my first finger. That's where I have my thumb. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to have it there, but I have it that right underneath my first finger. And it's probably a little bit higher up on the guitar than it would be under a C chord. When I go to a D, I'm going to bring my thumb up even higher, just provides more support. Now I'm not holding the neck with the palm of my hand again, but I am bringing my thumb up a little bit higher. That's probably not always the best technique. I mean, a lot of people say your thumb should always be down here, and I guess maybe there's some benefit to doing that, but at the same time, because your fingers are moving around, I think your thumb needs to move around as well to provide the best support for that as well. Now we learned a D7th chord last week, and so since these are exercises and not actual songs, we can probably make the statement that you can substitute a D7 in place of this D if you want, because these are exercises, and only because they're exercises. This would not work if we were playing a song of some sort, but because they're exercises, and to be honest with you, you can substitute any chord you want in there and make your own exercises. You know, if you say, well, how about if I do an E minor? Well, that would be fine as well. Again, it's because they're exercises. We're not actually trying to learn a detailed song. We're just trying to do an exercise. So you can make an exercise with any two chords like this. There's a trick to getting from D, G to a D7 chord, and it's the third finger on the first string. And the trick is that when I go from a G to a D7, I slide my third finger back to the second fret. Now I've got one finger in place already, so then I can just place the other two fingers for D7. Like I said, now D's on this sheet, so we're going to go over that one in a second. But because D7 was the chord we did last week, if I go from D7 back to G, I take my third finger and I'm going to slide it up to the third fret. Now I've got that one finger in place, and just pop the other two fingers on there for the G chord. Like that. Now, if you want to do the D chord on here, which is cool, I often tell people that I think a lot of chords using seventh chords are sort of leftovers from the old cowboy music, because if you really look at popular music and how it's played on the guitar, and again, I mean, all forms of popular music, it could be Nirvana, it could be Led Zeppelin, it could be Weezer, it could be Weezer covered a Toto song. When guitar players play D7 on the guitar, unless you're doing cowboy music, probably not going to play it like this. You might play it up here, you might play it like this, you might play it like this, but you're probably not going to do it this way unless you're doing cowboy music. And I'm not going to say there's never an exception to that, because that's not true. But just generally speaking, you're probably not going to play a D7 like that very often. You will, however, play many D chords on the guitar, a lot of D chords. You know, again, if there's a benefit to learning D, that's the one, because you're going to use a lot of those. The D7, not so much. Not like this, anyway. Otherwise, yes, but not this one. The D chord that we have on the sheet here is the opposite of the D7 we saw last week. Is like a triangle sitting on its base. Here we see it sort of upside down. It's sitting on the point. I guess if you want to look at chords as being shapes, I think I do. I know. I think a lot of people do. What we're going to do is put the first finger here on the third string, second fret. Second finger over here on the first string, second fret. Then the third finger goes right in between on the second string at the third fret. And a lot of people, because the fingers are scrunched a little closer together, I guess this chord maybe looks a little bit easier. It's actually a little hard on some counts, because this finger tends to lean over and touch the first string, and then we get this kind of a muted sound. So again, if I move my elbow around or I do things like that, I can really change that a little bit. And the other little trick that I do, and I think it's pretty hopefully easy to see what I'm doing here. is on my D chord, my second finger is right next to the second fret. My first finger is actually a little bit farther away, so I'm making room. I'm tilting my hand in a way that's going to help me play that chord and get a better sound. And then the third finger, instead of being up here right next to the fret, I actually have it backed up just a little bit. So there's just a little bit of space in there between my finger and the place and the actual fret. That's not the optimum place. The best place for me to have it is right next to the fret. But if that makes my finger lean over, then it's not really helping me to keep it up there. So I'm backing it up just a little bit. So I play these two chords now, G, and I'm going to do 8 counts of G, and then 8 counts of D. And these are good warm-up exercises. They're 8 counts. When you try a new chord, like we're doing the D chord is a new one because we learned D7 last week. When we're doing the D chord, it's always a challenge to learn a new chord because it's like, wow, I've got to make all my fingers move. So when you allow 8 counts, you give yourself a little more time to get to the chord. A little like mentally prepare for where you're going to move your fingers for. Like I said, these are exercises. So if you learn a new chord and you say, I learned an A minor chord, and we didn't learn an A minor chord, but if we learn an A minor chord and I want to make an exercise out of it, I'm going to do one like that. I'm going to say, all right, 8 counts, and then I'm going to go to the new chord, A minor, you know? So you can always make your own exercise. We don't need to have it printed on sheet. You can just write it down on paper and just say, okay, I'm going to do 8 counts of G, 8 counts of A minor, and learn a new chord that way. Down below this are just a bunch of different exercises, the same 3 chords put in different orders. And probably somewhere along the line, these are actual songs. I mean, in fact, I'm pretty sure they probably are actual songs. They're chords in a specific order that someone made a melody to fit this and made a song that sounds like this. For example, the one at the top that you can see right now, that's G, C, G, and D. This particular chord progression is sort of like what you would hear at the beginning of Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison. But it's probably who knows how many hundreds of other songs too, because these are all fairly common chords. So now, of course, if anybody knows that song, they're saying, well, that's not how the song goes. The song goes like this, like that, right? And that's kind of a little like a guitar melody that they have at the beginning of the song. But the chords that are actually being played in that part of the song by the acoustic guitarist, and also the chords that are being played once he starts to sing, are G, C, G, and D. And like I said, they're the same basic chords that a lot of people learn when they first start playing guitar. They're the same ones that someone's playing in the Van Morrison song. Okay? This particular exercise and the next 2 are doing chords in an order where there's only 4 beats each. Again, that's just a pulse to a song. That's just a rhythm to a song that somebody decided I want to play every chord for 4 counts instead of 8 counts. Down at the bottom is sort of a little more challenging, because down here we have the chords and they're only being played for 2 counts each. They're still the same 3 chords though, G, C, and D. They're both very, very popular chord progressions. So really this sheet that, like I said, Nick will be sending this around. This is just a whole bunch of different series and combinations of chords that are just these three chords, in ways that you probably have heard before in many songs. And you can try to sort of play around with them, and none of them are right, none of them are wrong. Pick one that you like and just play through it. It just helps build the repetition. Once you get sick of one, there's a couple more to choose from, so you can play through as many as you want. On this sheet, we have kind of the same idea, except it incorporates also this E minor chord that we did last week. As a matter of fact, the first line at the top is pretty much the chord progression we did last week, except it's got D at the very end instead of D7. Now, D7, again, is when you're playing a lot of pop music and stuff, and rock music, you're not going to play D7 like this very often. I mean, I can give you some examples, but it's just not going to happen very frequently. Much more common to be playing a D chord like this in any combination. That doesn't mean there's not exceptions, but most of the time, if you're going to be playing a chord up here, you're going to be playing a D chord. If you do have to play a D7 in rock and pop music, you probably do it any one of a number of other ways on the guitar, but definitely probably not this way. So each one of these is a separate exercise. The first one is the order that we learned last week, and so if we look at the order of those chords, we always had a common finger from one chord to the next. And like I said, I'm going to substitute D7 in the last measure, only because these are chord exercises. If it was an actual song, obviously it would be a little different. Then we have to kind of say, well, here's how the song goes. But when it comes time to make exercises, you can string any group of chords together and just say, I'm going to make an exercise out of them. So we're going to use G and E minor and C and D7. And then we're going to go back to G, and we're going to do it over and over again. And you can see that as I go through each chord progression now, I'm linking each one together with a common finger. From the G to the E minor, the first finger stays at the same place. From E minor to C, the second finger stays in the same place. Then to D7, my first finger stays at the same place. And from D7 back to G, the third finger stays on the same string, does have to slide forward. I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to play a D chord in its place, and I think you'll notice a little bit of difference, but it's not going to change things that much. And that's why I said in these particular exercises, since they are exercises, they're not actual songs, but they're exercises, you can use D7 or D. It's your choice. And in this one, I would not do that for any other piece of music except for what's on this paper, though. This is with the D chord. Got a whole bunch of other chord progressions on this sheet that are based on the same four chords. And again, they're just in different orders. And when you play through them, you may say, hey, that sounds really familiar, like it would be an actual song. And it probably is, because these are all very, very commonly used chords. I can give you any numbers of examples of songs that use chords in this order, or they might change one or two things. Instead of being 4 beats each, they might be 8 beats each. Instead of being 8 beats, they might only be 2 beats each. So there can be a lot of variations of these, but they're the same. Anyhow, Nick will be sending this all to you as well. And then there's one more sheet that I want to show you with chords, we kind of touched on this a little bit last week, and this is really not really about what chords you're using, but about what you're doing strumming wise. And this is what we call eighth note strumming, and it's all based on if you're tapping your foot, and I don't know if you can see my foot tapping, but I'm going to tap my foot. I'm going to stomp my foot actually, and as my foot goes down, my arm goes down, and that's what we've been doing so far when we strummed all these chord exercises. So I'm just going to start with a G chord, and every time my foot goes down, I'm going to strum down. And that's what we call a quarter note in 4/4 time. In 4/4 time, a quarter note gets one count or one tap of your foot, however you want to look at that, I guess. This is what a quarter note looks like in rhythmic notation. It looks like the slash mark that we've been seeing, but it also has a stem on the end of it. And for those of you who know what regular music notation looks like, it actually looks like a quarter note, except instead of having the oval note head, it has the slash mark. And slash marks are often used on any instrument that can play chords. It's usually giving you a rhythm to play with a chord. So any instrument that can play chords. You would see this from time to time on a piano. Probably not in classical music, but in jazz, pop, rock music. When you have piano, if they said C and they wrote a rhythm like this, they want the piano player to play that as well. So this is something that's used for any instrument that can actually play chords of some sort. The one thing that won't be written for piano players and probably won't be written for guitar players, other than something like this is trying to tell you how to do something. But if somebody just gave you a piece of music and said, "Here, I want you to play guitar on this song," it probably won't have down strokes and upstrokes written in. So at the top, right above that quarter note, you can see there's this funny looking symbol like that, and that's the symbol for a downstroke. And that's what we've been doing so far with the pick, is we've been strumming from the top of the guitar down. For anybody who plays violin, this is also the symbol for a down bow on violin. So I'm assuming that's probably where they got the symbols. They probably borrowed them from violinists. Right over here we have a symbol for an upstroke, and an upstroke is different than a downstroke because we're starting from the bottom of the strings down here and we're strumming up towards the ceiling. When we do that, we probably don't strum all 6 strings. If I do, I end up sounding like a machine. I think most people agree they don't want to sound like a machine. We want to sound human. So if I strum down, I might get all 6 strings, but when I strum up, I'm probably going to get 2 or 3, maybe 4. I'm definitely not going to get all 6 unless I really, really try to. One thing I've noticed that people do, sometimes not a good thing, but want to try not to do this, is when they strum down, they angle the pick this way. When they strum up, they angle the pick this way. And so they end up rotating their wrist, which really kind of emphasizes the machine part of it, but that, again, that's exactly what we don't want. So kind of describe it as almost like if you're strumming down, you're just going to let your arm fall, and you're bringing it back up and just lifting it up. It's going to sound different going down. It's going to sound different coming back up again. It also probably won't be exactly the same the whole way through. All downstrokes won't sound exactly the same. It's like when I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm probably, whether I try to or not, I'm probably placing emphasis on 1 because it's the beginning, it's the start. So even if I don't try to, I'm probably going to place emphasis on that anyway. Same thing happens when I start doing 8th notes. And over here you'll see this is what 8th notes look like. Notice that on all the numbered counts, we still are saying a number, and we're still got that symbol for a downstroke there. Okay, on all of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all are downstrokes. And that, again, that's where we're tapping our foot. I use a plus sign in here, but the way we say that is and. So when you count eighth notes, we count them 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All the ands we're going to be playing with upstrokes. I'm not actually moving my arm any faster. The only thing I'm doing is I'm actually hitting the strings on the way back up, like so. And this will be all downstrokes. This is all quarter notes. And if I start strumming eighth notes, I'm not moving my arm any faster. I guess you guys can see that, right? I don't know how much when I share a screen. I don't know how much it can do, but I want you to see what it looks like on paper too. So the way I'm counting that is I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, so on and so forth. That is an exercise to get used to changing back and forth between quarter notes and eighth notes, and quarter notes and eighth notes. Most music, you don't really want to play the same kind of note through the whole thing. It's kind of boring if you just have to kind of sit there and play quarter notes the whole time. I mean, after a while, that's what we've been doing so far. But a lot of people then they start saying, yeah, that's great, but that doesn't sound like what I'm hearing in the song. And that's because in the song you're hearing eighth notes as well, or maybe 16th notes or some other rhythm. You're hearing them mix it up. And if I do all eighth notes, while it might be a little more interesting, pretty soon that gets kind of too much the same after a while. So there's some exercises down below here that where it mixes quarter notes and eighth notes together, and I'm going to jump down to one that's sort of popular, which is down here, exercise number 10, and you can see that here where it says 2 eighth notes divided in, or 2 beats divided into eighth notes. And this turns out to be a somewhat popular strumming pattern that you can use. It's still 4 beats long. It's 6 strums, but it's only 4 beats long, and that I think is sort of confusing sometimes when you talk about how many beats something is. How many beats is how many times I would tap my foot, or how many times the metronome clicks. At the same time, it's not how many times I strum, because if I tap my foot 4 times, I can still strum more than that. Notice that on all the numbered counts, 1, 2, 3, 4, which we call the downbeat, every downbeat, I'm still playing a downstroke with my arm on the ands. 2 and 3 and is coming up, and so it'll sound like this. And this is just one example on the page. There's obviously, you want to get proficient at the first exercise where you're changing back and forth between quarter notes and eighth notes. Then you can try any of the other ones here. They're all good and probably used in some songs along the way, but I'm just picking this one because it seems to be sort of a popular strumming pattern, and one that you can use in a lot of different songs. It's kind of a generic pattern that works a lot. 1, 2 and 3 and 4. 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 Now, if I was going to apply that to one of the chord exercises on the other page, like I said, it's almost like I sort of take this as a rubber stamp, and I stamp this into a measure. So let me switch to one of the other sheets here, just to show you how this works. Well, I'm going to use it in the first exercise at the top here with G, E minor, C, and D. So instead of playing the 4 strums like we've done so far with G, I'm going to take that strumming pattern and I'm going to play that strumming pattern for the G chord. I'm going to play it for the E minor chord. I'm going to play it for C. I'm going to play it for D. I'm going to keep the rhythm the same for each chord. I'm going to play exactly that same rhythm pattern. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 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 Now again, this isn't necessarily something that that you need to perfect right now, but I want to show you these are sort of the steps that you can take as you practice. So you don't just start off and say, okay, in 5 minutes I'm going to learn how to strum all the eighth note rhythms and that's it, I'm done. But you sort of start off with the first one, get used to strumming quarter notes, and then eighth notes, and quarter notes and eighth notes, and go back and forth. Now it's interesting that we're on Zoom because one way I describe the quarter note and eighth note thing is if I mute my sound and I strum, you shouldn't be able to tell what rhythm I'm playing by looking at my arm, because if I strum, I'll strum silently, here's quarter notes and here's what eighth notes look like. They look the same. Because the only thing I'm doing differently is with the eighth notes is I'm hitting the strum on the way back up. So when you see somebody do this, it doesn't look like what you're hearing. What you're hearing goes down, and then what you see is you see somebody's arm just going at the same pace. And that's really, really kind of important. We don't speed up or slow down. It seems like it does, but it doesn't. There's just more strums is what's happening. There's just more strumming in between. Okay. This is when you hear people playing the guitar and they talk about strumming chords. This is what they're talking about. So, and kind of an introduction to it and stuff. But what happens? Usually you keep the rhythm the same, unless there's specific places in the song where you want to change it. But most of the time you keep the rhythm the same, and from that, and you play different chords, but you keep the rhythm the same. This happens. We've mentioned the Van Morrison song. There's that Good Riddance song by Green Day. It's the same. After the beginning parts, that kind of thing. But at the the second verse and on, and the rest of the song, I think it's a lot of strumming. And as fancy as that sounds, if I slow it down and, you know, you can see it's all based on the same thing that we just talked about, just all downstrokes and upstrokes. They're just doing it really fast, and it makes it seem, it's sort of magical in a way, I guess, but really when you slow it down and you see what's actually going on, it's like, oh, okay, I can do that, you know, because it's just a matter of I got to get proficient at it so that I can speed it up and play it real fast. Okay, so anyway, that's sort of about strumming. The other thing I wanted to show you guys today is basically how you can name any note on your guitar, and that doesn't mean necessarily instantly, but you can sort of go through a calculation or a thought process and figure it out. So the first thing we need to do, and I'm going to type it in the chat screen over here so everybody can see it, is something called the musical alphabet. And the musical alphabet is just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's like we said, it's all the letters of the musical alphabet. The musical alphabet is what we use in our music system as far as letter names. The letter names represent notes. They represent everything else too. They represent keys. They represent chords. A lot of different things. So we use those 7 notes. Now, the trick is in between some of these notes, and I say some of them because not everywhere, but in between some of them, there is, if you know on a piano, there's a black key. And of course, we don't have white keys and black keys on the guitar. We just have frets. And this is the thing that's kind of confusing, but it's actually kind of nice on a guitar because it's laid out equally. Everything's linear. On a piano, we've got the white keys, but then we got the black keys you have to move up here, and everybody hates them because you have to move your hand really weird, and it's like, you know, all that. On a guitar, it's just right here. They're all the same. We're going to start on the 5th string, because the 5th string is an A. If you remember, Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. Well, the 5th string is the A note, so there's our A. A is open. That's why it's kind of a good string to start with, is because the first letter of the musical alphabet is A, and our 5th string open is A. Now, there's 2 different types of intervals that we need to talk about on the guitar, and an interval is the distance between 2 notes. So this isn't an interval by itself. I need to play another note to make an interval out of it. And one of the intervals that we have on the guitar is what's called a half step. A half step is the distance of 1 fret. If I took that open string and I play 1 fret higher, that's what's considered the distance of a half step. If I play any note on the guitar and I play a half step higher, I play 1 fret higher. So I'm playing the 7th fret on the 1st string, I play the 8th fret, that's considered a half step. It's a distance. It's, you know, I know everybody wants to know, why is it called a half step? In Europe they call it a semitone, but they make names for this stuff, you know, and that's just what they call it. It's called a half step. Because there's something called a step, or let's be a little more specific, we're going to call it a whole step. It's really confusing when people call them steps and whole steps, because it's just confusing. Whole step is much more specific, instead of calling it a step and then a half step. Or in Europe, like they call it, sometimes they don't call them whole tones, they call them tones and semitones, and that's also confusing. So I like being a little more specific, saying whole step, half step. A whole step is the distance of 2 frets. So if I play the 7th fret again on my 1st string and I go up 2 frets higher, that's an interval of a whole step. If I do that with my open 5th string, which is A, and I play a whole step higher, I end up here at the 2nd fret. That's a whole step, a distance of 2 frets. Okay, so back to the musical alphabet. In between every adjacent letter of that musical alphabet, including going back to the beginning again. So when I go from the end, which is G, back to the beginning, this also includes this. In between every letter that's there is a whole step interval between every adjacent letter, except for B and C and E and F. So I'm going to type that down here too. Whoops. So between B and C is a half step, and between E and F is a half step. That's it. Everywhere else there's a whole step between any adjacent letters. So from A to B is a whole step, from C to D is a whole step, from D to E is a whole step, from F to G is a whole step, and from G to the next A, because this just loops over and over and over again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, over and over again, till you run out of frets. If you run out of frets, remember, pianos have a lot more notes on them, so you can still do it on a piano. After you run out of notes on a piano, you can say, well, my dog can hear the A, B, C, D, F, G for a good while yet. So, you know, that it just keeps going in both directions. It's like the number system. What's the highest number you can count to? 1,000. Well, then there's 1,001 after that, right? So it just keeps going in both directions, higher and lower. A, B, C, D, F, G. So when I start on the 5th string, the 5th string open is A. The next note is B. I know it's a whole step from A to B. So there's my B note. Now we'll come back. We'll figure out what's in between there in a second. From the B note to the C note, however, that's one of our half-step intervals. So I'm only going to the 3rd fret for the C note, because that's only a half step. half steps 1 fret, whole steps 2. From the C note to a D is a whole step, because again, there's whole steps between all adjacent letters except for B and C and E and F. So from C to D is a whole step. So I'm moving up to the 5th fret now. From D to E is also a whole step. Okay? That puts me up to the 7th fret. From E to F is only a half step. That's one of our exceptions at the bottom there. Half step from E to F. From F to G is a whole step. And here's the, like I said, when you go from G to the next A is another whole step. Notice that I should be at the 12th fret, and you see there's 2 dots on the side of my fingerboard, and there's 2 dots on the fretboard here. That's my 12th fret, and the 12th fret should always be the same note as the open string. So if I played the notes of the 12th fret, it's still Eddie, A dynamite, goodbye, Eddie at the 12th fret. It's 1 octave. It's higher than the open string, but it is the same name of note. So it's a kind of a quick reference point, just to let you know that if you got the right note or something like that. The 12th fret, open string should be the same if you count. Okay? So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whole steps between all adjacent notes, except for B and C and E and F, which are each half steps. Whole step is 2 frets, half step is 1. Now, the notes in between are what we call sharps and flats. We're going to concentrate on sharps just because they have 2 different names depending on a lot of different music theory things, like what key you're in, what chord you're playing, and stuff like that. But since we're not really playing chords with these, we're not really playing in a particular key, we're just trying to name notes, because obviously knowing what notes I'm playing is going to become kind of important at some point. And being able to communicate with other musicians, it makes a funny sound when I play this note. Where's that? What's that note? I don't know. So we want to make sure that we can identify things. We're going to call them by their sharp name, just to keep things sort of simple and consistent. So from A, and here's the B note we said was a whole step higher. There's a note in between. It's at the 1st fret. This note is called A sharp. Okay? A sharp. That note's other name is called B flat, but now you can start to see, okay, well, if I can call it A sharp or B flat. Which one do I want to call it? I got to make up my mind. Which one's right? They're both right. Then it sort of gets confusing. So we're just going to call it A sharp for right now, and just for consistency's sake. So A sharp, B. Now after B comes C. It's only a half step. Between C and D, C is at the 3rd fret, D is at the 5th fret. So between C and D, we have a note in between. That's going to be C sharp. So it's named for the note that's right below it, and the sharp symbol, which looks like a hashtag, that's what a sharp symbol kind of looks like. In fact, when they type it, that's pretty much what you type to make a sharp symbol in chord notation or whatever, and also sometimes in note notation as well. You type a sharp symbol, you type that hashtag thing. A sharp symbol raises the note by half step. So this is where I play C. This is where I'll play C sharp. This is where I play A. This is where I play A sharp. So C, C sharp. Next note is D. After that comes E, but E's a whole step higher, so that means there's one in between. So this is going to be D sharp. Again, there's D. D sharp is 1 fret higher, half step higher. E, F, a half step from E to F, a half step higher than F is going to be F sharp, and then G, G sharp, A. So what I've got, going back to the beginning, is I've got A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. This continues on. The next would be, we'd start over A sharp, B, C, until I run out of frets. Now that takes care of the fifth string. So people say, what about the third string, for example? Third string is a G. Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. So this is G. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to start from the G note. So this would be G, G sharp, A. Now I know, and there's A, but this time it's at the second fret. And you can hear that this A note right here and the fifth string, they're an octave apart. They sound sort of like the same note. They're pitched class, you might call them. So that's A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and G's at the 12th fret, which is the same as the open third string. Open and 12 are the same. That, again, I want to point out that this doesn't mean you instantly know where all the notes are. If somebody says, can you find an A note on your first string? You be like, well, yeah, I can. It's going to take a little while. Okay, so that's all right. So here's E. I know from E to F is only a half step, so F is one fret higher. F to G is a whole step, so in between there's F sharp, G, G sharp, A is at the 5th fret. So it takes a little while to calculate it out, but this is important. At least have the ability to figure out what the name of each note is. Even if it takes you a minute to figure one out, it doesn't really matter. As long as you can figure it out, it gives you the knowledge to say, hey, it does make a weird sound when I play the D sharp on my 5th string for whatever reason. I don't know why it would make a weird sound, but if it would, you can identify things that way. And or if you're playing with a piano player, you say, hey, you told me to play D sharp, and I'm playing a D sharp, and it doesn't sound right with what you're doing. It allows you to get in there and communicate in a much more musical way. If you said to a piano player, when I play this, and they're going to be like, what's a this note? I don't know what a this note is. Or you might say, I'm playing a 6, and the piano player is going to know what's a 6. If you say I'm playing a D sharp, they're going to know what you're talking about. Hopefully, they should know what you're talking about. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know that's the daunting thing there, but at least it gives you a method. You don't have to look at things as being numbers anymore, but it's more like, oh, okay, I can figure out what the names of the notes are. To think about it for a little while, but I can figure them out. So I don't know. I can't see anybody, but if anybody has any questions. I guess not. Maybe everybody went to sleep. Yes. Nick will be sending the note sheet. If anybody needs the musical alphabet or the half steps or the sharp symbol thing there, you can probably either take a screenshot of it or you can copy and paste it into a text file. Or if you're on a computer, I think you can actually save that chat, I believe, down at the bottom where it says in your chat screen, if you hit the 3-dot thing there, I think it says save chat, and you can actually save that, and it'll save everything that we chatted about. But, so if you need to save any of the stuff. As far as I want to tell you a little bit real quick about the lessons. What I do with lessons is we try to figure out what your goals are. Like, this is kind of a general class. We had to kind of make it fit everybody. And some people might like Green Day, some people might like Gene Autry. So I really you know, we kind of have to sort of just give you basic guitar information. But if somebody comes into a lesson and says, I really am a Weezer fan, I want to learn how to play a Weezer song. Okay, great. Let's do it, because we're going to learn stuff. You know, somebody says, I don't like Weezer at all. I like I don't know, the Ramones. Okay, right? Whatever you know, whatever we feel like doing, we can do. Because as long as you're playing music, as long as you're playing an A chord or a D chord or a G chord or an F chord or whatever, as long as you're playing, I don't care what music you're playing, you're learning that chord, and that's going to benefit you 5 years from now, 10 years from now, however long you play. It's going to benefit you no matter what. If you're learning a scale, it doesn't matter whether you learn Judas Priest or whether you learn Bill Withers or whether you whatever. It doesn't really matter as long as you learn the scale. So I want to point that out. That's sort of what I do. So whatever your interests are, we try to keep it fun, try to help you learn what you want to learn, and try to keep it musical so that you're actually learning musical information as well. So anyway, that's my little sales pitch, I guess. Anybody have any questions? I know it's early. All right, I'll hand it back over to Nick.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That was great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for everything. I know I had a lot of fun on these. And yeah, I'll send out the sheets you put up today and the link if anyone wants to review anything. And if you have any other questions, everyone should have my email, of course, so you can just send things to me. And thank you all for signing on. This was great. Bye, Jeff. Thanks.